Title: What Happened to Women Taken by Vikings? Before the first shout, there was the sound of oars. A village at the edge of the sea wakes to a ripple, not a roar. Drifts of mist, gulls circling as if curious. A line of longships where the horizon should be. Men run to the shore with spears not meant for this kind of war. Mothers pull children close, and a young woman who has never been more than a mile from her own hearth sees a prow carved like a serpent kiss the sand. What happens next is told in annals and bones and law codes and lullabies. Told and untold, because she is not the only one. She is the first face we will follow, but there are thousands behind her, gathered into a tide that will pour north and east and into the dead heart of winter. We often picture Vikings as raiders, fire at monasteries, gilt crosses lifted from altars. But the hoard that mattered most was not always gold. In the 9th century, the Irish record keepers write with tight, furious strokes about a different kind of loss. Boats heavy not with chalices, but with women and children, sailed out beyond the line where help cannot follow. The Norse had a word for the people taken: thralls. The law codes preserved in Iceland and Norway are sparse, almost cold, but they are clear. There were men and there were women in that category, marked by different terms, by different expectations. A female thrall, an ambot, could be born to that fate or stolen into it. Her life would hinge on the coin she raised or the work she did, and on the will of the people who claimed her. Imagine the press of bodies on a deck slick with brine and fear. She cannot see land now. The sea smells of pitch and wool and old fish. The men around her speak fast in a clipped tongue, laughing sometimes in the same breath as they curse. For some, this is routine. For her, every dip of the hull is a question: where do they take us? The answer is a web drawn across half a world. It runs west to new-founded towns where the Norse are not just raiders, but rulers. It runs east along rivers through dark forests to cities of brick and gold. For a captive woman, the path she walks will shape her children's lives, and through them, the history of islands and farms she will never see again. In the west, the path often led to Dublin. To picture it now is to picture a market of ships and shouts, timber palisades, and the glassy sheen of a river mouth set with stakes and ropes like traps for fish. Archaeology has lifted pieces of that world into light. Weights and scales sized for small payments, hooks and rivets from hulls that came and went with tides, shackles not meant for animals. Dublin in the mid-9th century is a Norse base, and within a generation it becomes the heart of a trade in people. Contemporary Irish writers spit the words: cargoes of captives, women counted the way you count barley. Ransom is a possibility for the fortunate, for those with names that mean money. The rest stare at the boards and wait to be sorted. But the sea brings captives not only to markets. It carries them into households. We think of the Viking longhouse as a place of heat and smoke, benches against walls, a weaving loom strung in the doorway like a gate. In those rooms, women, free and unfree, kept a different economy alive. On farms from Norway to Iceland, wool became a form of money, measured in lengths of rough, resilient cloth. Hands did that work, thousands of them, and many of those hands belonged to women who had been taken. The sagas, written down 2 centuries later in Iceland, are silent about the routine cruelties. But they know this: the work of women made men rich, and the women who did it did not always belong to the households they served. Under pagan law, a man could keep a concubine, a frilla, beside his wife, and her status mattered mostly for the status of her children. Some concubines were free. Many were not, at least not at first. If a captive woman bore a son to a powerful man, that child could anchor her in place, tip her toward manumission, change her from property to person, but only in the eyes of the law that counted. In a saga from the West, there is a story about an Irish woman named Melkorka, sold across the sea, kept as a concubine in Iceland, the mother of a boy who would become a chieftain. She is silent for a long time, as if the language has been beaten out of her. When she speaks, finally, she names a father across the water, a status left behind in a country that will not claim her now. It is a story told with the slant of later generations, but its spine is solid. Women captured in the West became the mothers of Iceland. You can see it in DNA drawn from teeth and bones. Paternal lines in Iceland that trace to Scandinavia. Maternal lines that lean toward Ireland and Scotland. Not a romance, not a conquest poem, but a demographic fact. A settlement built by Norse men and women they brought with them, willingly or not. In the North Atlantic, the past breathes through place names and ages of bog, but it also sits in the shared features of faces and the curve of a hand at the loom. For captives taken in raids, the battlefield might be long past, but the front line moved into the home. None of this softens the edges. The laws that mention slaves also speak of punishment. A thrall who ran could be beaten, mutilated, killed. A woman without protectors could be discarded. And yet, even in the logic of ownership, there were cracks where light came through. Manumission was not rare. Some captives earned their freedom through years of labor, or received it as part of a will. The church, spreading slowly into the north in the 10th and 11th centuries, frowned hard on the trade of Christians. Priests preached ransom, wrote letters of outrage, paid to bring people back. In the record of one monastery, there is a line item, almost tight with desperation, a payment to retrieve captives from the fleet. The men who took them counted the coins. The women who came home did not always find the same doors they left. Turn east, and the air cools. The ships leave salt behind for the copper green of rivers. Along the Volga and the Dnieper, Norse traders, called the Russ by the people they passed, moved like magnets through a field of villages. They bought, they took, they sold. In the markets of the steppe and the walled cities southward, Arabic writers see fair-haired men with swords and skins, and with people. The word they use for the slaves in those markets, sakaliba, means Slavs, and by extension, pale-skinned Europeans. There were boys in those chains. There were women. A traveler from Baghdad, an envoy named Ahmad ibn Fadlan, stands on a riverbank in the 10th century and writes what he sees. It is a funeral for one of the Russ, a man of means. There is a ship on a pyre, and beside it, a girl owned by the dead man, the kind of girl who in another port would be sold. In this ritual, she is led to the grave as if to a wedding, dressed and adorned, given intoxicants, told stories of a paradise beyond. She is also assaulted, and in the end, killed to accompany her owner into the fire. Ibn Fadlan's description clangs against modern ears like iron. It is meant to. It is one of the few places where a voice from that time puts an enslaved woman at the very center of the frame, and the fate there is terrible. Not every captive met an end like that. One did. One is enough to show a range we can hardly hold in our hands. Between the market in Dublin and the pyre on the Volga lies 1,000 other endings. Some captives were traded many times, east for silver dirhams that poured into Scandinavia by the chestful. Some were used as hostages in the local politics of islands and coasts, shifted like game pieces on a board drawn with tides. Some, taken as wives by settlers in Orkney or the Hebrides, moved from captive to kin in ways that would echo in clan names and kinships for centuries. Some died before the second winter. Documents do not preserve their names. Shoemakers' awls and broken combs, uncovered from the floors of Norse houses, are mute, but they hint at the work of hands that learned new rooms by counting planks. In those rooms, the language shifted. A Gaelic lullaby pressed into a Norse meter. An Irish prayer, whispered secretly in a land that bent toward Thor and then Christ. Churches rose beside pagan graves. The distinction between wife and concubine blurred or sharpened depending on who was watching. By the time the sagas were written down, the people telling stories about the founding generation also knew how the law had changed under Christianity, how baptism redefined who could be owned, and how old habits lingered anyway in the private corners of a hall. If there is a single answer to what happened to women taken by Vikings, it is that there isn't one. Not a single thread you can follow to a neat knot. There are paths that open and close with luck and violence. There are bargains struck in rooms where the air is heavy with smoke and milk, with fear and calculation. There are small defiances. A woman who teaches her child the words of two lands. A freed woman who leaves a silver brooch in her grave. A girl who finds a way to send a message across a strait that used to be her world. The young woman on the longship, the one with the sea in her eyes and the salt on her lips, is about to feel dry land again. The planks creak as men unship the oars, and the boat noses into a river mouth crowded with other hulls. She'll be pulled up past fish racks and workshops and the long, low house where things are counted. Shouts rise in a language she does not yet know, but will learn in pieces. Price, wool, weight, ransom, wife. A man with a braided beard will lift her chin to look at her teeth. Somewhere in that city, a priest will ring a bell that sounds like home, and another captive will turn toward the noise even as hands pull her the other way. Between those sounds is a choice that isn't hers to make, and a future that will, despite that, bear her shape. What happens next depends on the next hand that reaches for her sleeve, and on whether the voice that calls out from the crowd is one she recognizes, or a stranger